So you have a telescope, a mount, a camera, and a sturdy tripod. So you think you're ready to run an astrophotography session? Well, hold on a second. There are some things that you need to look out for before doing this. For those watching for the first time, hello, my name's Nick. I am an astrophotographer, and recently I've opened my first astrophotography print store on Etsy. So if you want to enjoy the night sky but you don't have a telescope, why not check it out? Anyway, let's get back to the video. So the first thing you need to know is what's the rough exposure time for an object that you choose. So if you've watched one of my videos, then you will know that deep sky astrophotography is about collecting light. And exposure time means how long you're collecting light for a given object. So obviously, brighter objects require less exposure time, while fainter object requires more exposure times. So here we have the Messier Planner website, which is a good tool to research any deep sky objects. So to see the rough exposure time of a deep sky object, you can click on the Explore catalog. So you can filter out any catalog if you want. And then let's say if you're gonna pick, let's say a nebula, let's say the Orion Nebula. So if you place your cursor around here, you can see the estimated total integration time, which is the exposure time, like an estimate of how long you need to get a detailed image of a deep sky object. Now, Orion Nebula, an estimate of 2 to 4 hours, which is considered like a bright deep sky object. Some of those are more like fainter and requires much more exposure time than 2 to 4 hours. Let's find the one which is a bit tricky. Let's say here. Oops. Let's say here, this fainter globular cluster will require more exposure time to get a detailed image. Another one here, like the Crab Nebula. So you see, a fainter object will require more exposure time. So do your research about how much exposure time, like as a rough guide, so that you will know how easy it is to capture that target, because sometimes you might have a shorter imaging window of only a few hours. So if let's say you go for some very tricky target and let's say you only have like 4 hours of imaging window, you're going for a target which require 10 hours of exposure time, and of course the result will be very disappointing. So keep in mind about that. Now another thing you need to look at is your camera's field of view, and it really depends on your telescope and the camera really. So what you need to look at is your telescope's focal length and your camera's sensor size. So the focal length and the sensor size plays a big part in determining the field of view of your camera. So why is this important is because depending on what deep sky objects, some deep sky objects looks bigger and some looks relatively smaller. And depending on the field of view of your setup, some deep sky objects may fit perfectly into your field of view, while some may become too big or too small for your setup. So we can use this website called Telescopius to find out if the deep sky object that you want to photograph is it the best fit for your field of view. So what we can do here is, let's say you found an object that you really like, maybe a nebula or a galaxy, let's say Andromeda galaxy. So I'm gonna search here Andromeda galaxy. So if you scroll down here to telescope simulator, and then you have to choose here, click here, and then input your telescope's focal length and your camera sensor size. So I think the default setting, this parameter here, not parameter, I mean the size here, I think by default is using a full frame camera sensor. So if, let's say I'm using an APS-C sensor, which is approximately around 24 millimeters to 17 millimeters. Well, if you don't know the sensor size of your camera, then research your specific camera model. So now this is just a rough estimate. The APS-C sensor size may vary between different camera models. So I've input the correct sensor size and focal length of the telescope. So let's see. So here, Andromeda galaxy fits perfectly within my field of view. You see the whole galaxy sits within this green box, and this green box refers to the field of view of my telescope and camera, or like the field of view of my camera. So you see it sits nicely within the field of view. So that means that Andromeda galaxy is a good fit for my particular camera and telescope. But let's say if I use the same telescope and the same camera for some other galaxies, let's say if I'm going to do Whirlpool galaxy, scroll down here, and the same settings of focal length and sensor size. And you can see here, the galaxy looks way too small for my field of view. So that way you can tell it might not be the best fit for my setup, because my field of view is too wide for that. So that means that if I want to attempt to photograph Whirlpool galaxy, then I probably need to get a telescope with a longer focal length. Let's say I pump up to 700. And you see, look, the galaxy looks bigger because the focal length is longer, that means the field of view is more narrow. Well, let's say I pump up to 1,000. Look, so that's why you can see that some objects require longer focal length and a narrower field of view to do justice, while some objects will require a wider field of view. Let's pick another object, like let's try the Pleiades star cluster. So you can see if I'm using 1,000mm focal length telescope with an APS-C sensor, the star cluster may be a bit too big for the field of view, or too wide for this field of view. But well, my current telescope has a 400mm focal length, and you see here the field of view is just perfect. So the whole point of researching the field of view is to determine whether the deep sky object that you choose fits properly with your camera setup, because there's nothing worse than when you've already set up your telescope and your camera, you've polar aligned, only to realize that the object doesn't fit. It's just gonna end up with more frustration and disappointment. The last thing I want to talk about here is whether the deep sky object is gonna be visible tonight or not. If you don't already know, most deep sky objects are only visible during a certain time of the year. So, like some objects, let's say the Orion Nebula, is a winter target in the northern hemisphere. So, it's only like visible during the winter months, and you can't capture the Orion Nebula during the summer months because it's below the horizon. While vice versa, there are some targets that are visible during the summer months, but ideally not really visible like in the winter months. So how do we know that? So we can use stellarium. So you see here, it shows you the constellations in real time. So now it's showing you what constellations are gonna be visible tonight. So you can clearly see there's Orion here, and the Orion Nebula is here. So that now you can know the Orion Nebula is gonna be visible tonight. So you can choose to photograph this nebula tonight if it's clear, or you can choose, let's say you can search for objects here. Let's say you can search Horsehead Nebula, and you can see if it's visible. Yes, it is. It is going to be visible tonight. However, you may find out that there were some objects are not visible tonight. It's gonna be below the horizon during the night. So let's pick an example here. Let's say you want to photograph Lagoon Nebula. Oops, so you can see the result is directing you to the ground, which means tonight the Lagoon Nebula is going to be below the horizon. It's not going to be visible. So now you know that you won't be able to photograph this nebula tonight because it won't be visible, so you won't be able to point at the Lagoon Nebula tonight. So another way to find out if the deep sky objects is going to be visible tonight is using Messier Planner again. Yes. Here, so if you scroll down to the catalog tab here, so you can see there's a graph like in here underneath each deep sky object, which shows you what time this object is going to be visible, is going to be above the horizon. Let's say, let's pick this galaxy, let's say here. So this galaxy is currently, it says below horizon now, and it's going to be best seen around 3 a.m. in the morning. So if you, let's say you plan to image this galaxy, then you might have to wait until midnight to attempt to photograph it. Let's pick another one then. Let's browse the catalog. Let's say, well, Lagoon Nebula, I've already demonstrated to you before, just now, using Stellarium. It's going to be below horizon now. And you see, the Lagoon Nebula only start to rise above the horizon at around 4 a.m. So by the time it's going to be dawn anyway, so you have no chance of photographing Lagoon Nebula tonight. So make sure when you do your research, make sure to look for targets, or I mean objects that is going to be above the horizon tonight. Let's say Andromeda Galaxy, you can see is at the highest around the afternoon, but by the time night comes in, it's still above the horizon. So you can attempt photographing Andromeda Galaxy if you want. And Orion Nebula as well, look. It's still above the horizon at night tonight. So knowing the visibility of the certain deep sky object beforehand is important for you to pick the right object for the night, because you don't want to be setting up your telescope at night and then trying to find and photograph a deep sky object that you like, only to realize it's not even visible at all. The bonus tip here for you that you need to look at is the moon phase, because as you know, when the moon is bright at night, it's going to wash out the fainter details of nebulae and galaxies. So the weeks where the moon is bright and like approaching the full moon phase, it wouldn't be most ideal to photograph deep sky object. So yeah, here in Messier Planner, if you go to the Planner tab here, and you can literally see the moon phase for a given day, for a given night. You see here, tonight, the moon is almost full. So yeah, this week the moon is like at least 90% illuminated, which is like the full moon phase. So it wouldn't be best to go out and attempt to photograph a nebula or galaxy tonight, because the moon is going to be full, and hence the bright light of the moon is going to wash out a lot of faint details of nebula or galaxy. So ideally, you would want to attempt to photograph any deep sky objects during the new moon phase, or just when the moon is not visible in the night sky. So I hope this video helped you better plan out your imaging session so that you can get the most out of the clear night available, and you can enjoy more about the process of astrophotography. So clear skies, and I will see you next time.